The wind howled through the trees, bending the thin branches like they were made of paper. There was no moon tonight, only the whisper of storm clouds gathering in the sky above. The trail, muddy and slick with recent rain, twisted sharply around a jagged rock face. A sudden crack of thunder split the silence, and in that moment, a shadow darted across the path, its form sleek and muscular, moving with intent. At first, the hiker thought it was a deer, a trick of the light maybe, or a trick of his tired mind. He took another step forward, his boots slipping in the mud. A sharp growl cut through the wind, harsh and low. The man froze. Something wasn't right. The figure materialized in front of him. A German shepherd, its fur dark like the night around them. Its eyes gleamed like amber lights, focused, determined. It didn't look like a wild animal, but it wasn't friendly either. There was no wagging tail, no panting tongue, just a tense stillness. The hiker took a cautious step back, hand instinctively moving to the pocket of his jacket, where his phone was hidden. "Easy, boy," he said, his voice tight with uncertainty. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts as the storm approached with growing intensity. "Easy." The dog didn't move. It simply stood, blocking the narrow trail with its imposing frame. There was no way around it. The hiker glanced behind him, but the path was steep and slick. The storm was closing in fast and the air smelled like rain and danger. Another growl. The hiker felt his pulse quicken, his legs locked in place. He wasn't afraid of dogs. He'd always loved them as a kid. But there was something in the shepherd's eyes now. Something desperate. "Why won't you let me pass? Arai worrying him on Shani," he muttered, his voice wavering. The dog shifted, and the hiker barely caught the glint of something metal, something that seemed too out of place on this desolate trail. It was a collar, but it wasn't the usual kind. It had a tag, something familiar about it. His eyes widened. It was a military dog's tag. He could see the engraved numbers, the name barely visible in the half-darkness. Scrap. His stomach twisted. Scrap. The dog seemed to react to the word. His ears flicked, and his posture softened just a fraction, as if he understood. The hiker, now realizing the dog wasn't just some stray, squatted down slowly, instinctively, his fear replaced by curiosity. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now, like speaking to a wounded animal. He slowly pulled out his phone, trying to get a better look at the tag. The storm broke open in a sudden crash of rain, soaking the hiker instantly. The dog stepped closer, blocking his way forward, its tail stiff. Something in the air had shifted, and then it hit him. There was a sound now, something distant, but growing louder. Screams, panic. But it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from behind the rock wall on the left. The sound was muffled, faint, as if it were coming from within the earth itself. The hiker's heart slammed into his chest. He snapped his phone to life, his fingers shaking as he tapped the screen to locate the source. The noise. It wasn't human. Number. It was a child. The dog was standing firm, as if it knew. He had been on these trails many times, and the forest was rarely so alive with terror. He looked at Scrap again. The name hit him like a flash of recognition. This wasn't just any dog. This was a military dog, one trained to seek and protect, a former soldier. This dog had been through hell and back. It was here for a reason, and that reason was not to keep him from the trail. Without thinking, he turned and started moving toward the sound. The German shepherd barked sharply, an order, not a warning. The man hesitated, but only for a moment. He didn't know why, but something deep inside him told him to trust this dog, to trust what was happening. The hiker pushed through the underbrush, his heart pounding as he followed the sound of desperate cries. The rain fell harder, and the path became harder to see. His boots slipped in the mud, but the dog, Scrap, moved ahead of him, guiding the way. Another bark, this time a command. The hiker sped up, his breath catching in his throat as the landscape ahead blurred. And then through the dense trees he saw it, a hole, dug hastily, dirt scattered around its edges like a grave. The sound of the child's voice, now unmistakably real, echoed in his ears. But it wasn't just any child. The voice was frantic, fearful, struggling. The hiker moved faster now, pushing past the thick brush, tearing through the damp branches. He didn't know why, but something was guiding him. Someone was counting on him. When he reached the hole, he dropped to his knees, his hands trembling, as he peeled back the layers of dirt. Beneath the soil, a small, dirt-covered face appeared. A child, no more than 6 or 7, her eyes wide with fear. Her mouth was bound with a cloth, and her small body was bruised, bloodied. Scrap stood beside him, alert, watching the trees, making sure they weren't being followed. The hiker's heart broke as he gently pulled the girl from the shallow grave, cradling her against his chest. Her body was trembling, but she was alive. The thunder rolled overhead again, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a storm, it was the sound of something deeper, a warning. This was only the beginning. And as the hiker whispered reassurances to the little girl in his arms, he realized that this was why Scrap had stopped him. Not to keep him away, but to bring him here. The first step in exposing a hidden, terrifying truth had been taken, and everything was about to change. The hiker's heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't just the rush of fear or the storm pushing in around them. It was something deeper, a sudden, stark clarity. As he cradled the child in his arms, the weight of what he was holding, the fragile life he had just saved, felt like a turning point. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to get out, but the truth, however dark, was already unraveling. The storm wasn't the only thing gathering speed tonight. Scrap, the German shepherd, turned toward the hiker, his amber eyes reflecting the dark sky, catching the last flashes of lightning. The dog's gaze seemed to speak volumes. He didn't need to bark, didn't need to give any command. There was a silent understanding between them now. The hiker wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. "Hold on," the hiker whispered to the child, his voice hoarse, even though he didn't know if she could hear him or if she was just too afraid to react. Her body was trembling, and her chest was shallow with each ragged breath. But her eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, met his, silently pleading. He could feel her pain, the helplessness in her small body. She wasn't just afraid of the storm, she was afraid of something much worse. As he shifted to stand, the rain lashed against his face, and the wind kicked up, carrying the scent of pine and something heavier, more sinister. The ground was treacherous, slick with rain, but he forced himself forward, every step feeling like it took a part of him with it. He didn't know where the trail would take him. There was no plan, no clear direction. He simply moved, driven by instinct. The girl in his arms felt lighter now, the adrenaline masking how truly frail she was. Scrap stayed at his side, the dog's strong, steady presence giving him a strange sense of peace in the chaos. They moved through the woods together. The only sound, the pounding rain, the occasional crack of thunder, and the soft, frightened whimpers of the girl. But there was something more, a creeping unease that lingered in the air. The child, though trembling, wasn't just scared. There was something in her eyes that hinted at more than just a survivor's fear. It was knowledge, something she knew that he didn't. He pushed the thought aside for a moment, focusing on getting them both to safety. He was almost certain there was a ranger station a few miles further along the trail, though it felt like miles of wilderness stretched out before him. The hiker's mind raced, running through all the possible scenarios. The police would want to know about the girl, who she was, where she'd come from. The Forest Service would be able to trace him once he used his phone to call for help. The shelter would help her. But there was a nagging feeling in his gut that kept telling him to hurry. And then there was the dog. What had Scrap seen? What had he been through? The hiker glanced down at the dog, who trotted silently beside him. He could feel the loyalty, the unwavering protectiveness radiating from him. Scrap had been through things that the hiker couldn't even imagine. He knew that much, but that wasn't the end of it. No, the dog wasn't just an animal lost in the woods. He had a purpose. He was here for a reason. Scrap's ears perked up suddenly, his head snapping toward the trees behind them, and the hiker froze. The child let out a soft gasp, and the hiker's breath caught in his throat. The sense of dread was palpable now. A sound, soft but deliberate, moved through the forest. A branch snapping, low and careful, as if someone or something was watching them. The hiker's heart skipped. There was no mistaking it. They weren't alone. Scrap growled, a low, guttural sound that was barely audible over the wind. His posture shifted, tense, ready for action. The hiker hesitated, every muscle screaming at him to move, but his feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. Whoever, or whatever, was following them was getting closer. He could hear their footsteps now, crunching in the underbrush, a deliberate pace, as if they had all the time in the world. The hiker turned back to the child, his fingers gently brushing her rain-soaked hair from her face. He couldn't let anything happen to her. He couldn't. Another crack of thunder, this time closer. The world seemed to hold its breath. "You're going to be okay," the hiker whispered to her, but the words felt hollow, empty in the face of what was coming. He couldn't protect her from the unknown. He didn't know who was out there, or why. The sound grew louder now, too close, too calculated. The hiker's pulse thundered in his ears, matching the rhythm of his racing thoughts. He had to act, fast. "Scrap!" he called, but his voice was strained, barely a whisper against the storm. The dog didn't hesitate. With a sharp bark, he bolted ahead, disappearing into the trees like a shadow. The hiker didn't wait for him to return. Instead, he sprinted, adrenaline coursing through his veins, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The child's weight in his arms felt like a heavy burden now, but it was nothing compared to the gnawing sense of danger closing in on them. The storm made the woods feel alive, an oppressive weight that seemed to press in on every side. The path ahead was unclear, the ground uneven, but the hiker knew he had no choice. He couldn't stay here, not with the child in his arms and whatever was following them so close. A shout. It was distant at first, but growing nearer. The hiker's stomach twisted. There was no mistaking that voice. It was the voice of someone he'd heard before, someone who shouldn't have been here. The man's heart clenched as he realized the truth. The storm, the rain, the frantic chase, they weren't just natural. They were part of something much darker. Someone was hunting them. Someone knew exactly where they were. And the child was the key. The hiker's breath came in sharp bursts, his lungs burning from the sprint. But he couldn't stop. He had to keep moving. He could feel the child trembling in his arms, her small hands gripping his jacket as if she were holding on for dear life. Every step felt like it took him deeper into the unknown. The storm was unforgiving, the rain slashing down in sheets, but it wasn't the storm that made his heart race. It was the voice. The shout was closer now, unmistakable. The hiker's instincts screamed at him to move faster, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, the trees thick and impenetrable. He wasn't sure how long he had been running, how far he had come, but there was no turning back now. They couldn't stop, not with that voice pursuing them. The child whimpered, and the sound cut through the pounding rain. Her body was soaked, her small frame shivering uncontrollably. But there was something else, something in her eyes that made the hiker's stomach churn. There was more to her fear than the storm, more to her terror than just being lost in the woods. She wasn't just scared of the storm, she was scared of them. "Hold on, I'm getting you out of here," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could even hear him. She had barely spoken since he'd found her, only the occasional gasps or soft cries. But there was something in the way she clung to him, something that told him she understood more than she let on. She wasn't just a lost child, she was a survivor. A snap of a branch echoed behind him, and the hiker's heart lurched. There was no mistaking it now. Whoever was following them was getting closer. Too close. He pushed harder, his legs burning, his mind scrambling for any sign of salvation. The trees around them had become a blur, a wall of shadows, but through the chaos of rain and wind, he saw something ahead. Something that wasn't just more forest. It was a break in the trees, a wide clearing that led toward a small rocky outcrop. He could see the faint outline of what looked like a cabin in the distance. A light flickered through a window. He could get to that cabin. "Just a little further," he urged, his voice raw, though the child's wide, frightened eyes remained focused on him. She wasn't responding, but he could feel her hands clutching tighter, as if her body was on autopilot, too scared to move but too aware to be still. The hiker's mind raced. There was something wrong, something about this place that made his skin crawl. The light in the cabin, it was faint, too faint. It didn't look like someone was expecting visitors. It was as though they were waiting for someone to arrive. Another voice, this time closer. "Get back here, you little runt!" The words were harsh, cutting through the storm with an anger that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The voice was familiar now, one he didn't want to remember. It was the same voice he'd heard before, shouting in the distance. The hiker's pulse spiked. His hands trembled as he shifted the child, trying to hold her closer, but his mind was already working through the worst possibilities. That voice, it wasn't just anyone. It was a man he had met years ago, a man whose face he never thought he'd see again. Lennox. Lennox. The same man who had disappeared from the town. The same man whose name had been linked to dark rumors, whispered about in hushed tones. The hiker's stomach twisted as the memories came flooding back. Back to when he'd been just a kid. When Lennox had been one of those figures in town, larger than life, until he vanished under strange circumstances. No one had known where he went, but everyone had known he wasn't a good man. The hiker's hands tightened around the child, his throat tightening with rage and fear. Lennox had always been trouble, but this wasn't just trouble. This was something far worse. He hadn't just come for the child, he had come for them. As if in response to the hiker's panic, Scrap barked sharply, his stance protective. The dog was already ahead, moving into the clearing with a confidence that only an animal with a purpose could possess. The hiker didn't hesitate. He moved after the dog, his legs burning, but his mind focused solely on that cabin. The trees finally parted, and the clearing opened up before them. The small cabin stood like a solitary sentinel in the storm, its windows barely visible through the rain. As they neared, the hiker's breath caught. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. The hiker's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was a trap, if it was just another cruel twist of fate, but he couldn't stop now. Not with the child in his arms, not with Lennox so close. Scrap stopped in his tracks, his body low, his ears pricked. The dog was watching the cabin intently, every muscle coiled. The hiker's hand tightened around the child, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. He knew they were being watched. The hairs on his neck stood up and his gut churned. He had to be careful. He had to get them inside before they were seen. But as the hiker moved closer, something caught his eye. A shadow, a figure standing just beyond the doorframe, silhouetted in the dim light. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadows. But the unmistakable silhouette of a weapon in his hand caught the hiker's attention. Lennox. The hiker's blood ran cold. The man's voice came again, sharp and chilling, like it had been waiting for this moment. "You're too late." The door creaked open wider, and the figure stepped forward. And the storm, the rain, the darkness, they all seemed to fade into the background. The hiker had no more time to run. This was it. The figure stepped fully into view, his tall frame illuminated by the dim, flickering light from inside the cabin. The storm continued to rage around them, but for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The hiker's breath caught in his throat as his eyes locked onto Lennox's cold, calculating gaze. The man's lips curled into a twisted smile, as if savoring the hiker's fear. "You really thought you could just walk away, didn't you?" Lennox's voice was low, but there was no mistaking the menace beneath it. His fingers curled around the handle of a rifle slung across his shoulder, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough to remind the hiker of the danger they were in. The hiker took a step back, holding the child even tighter against his chest. But the weight of her fragile body felt heavier with every passing second. He didn't know how to explain it, but there was something in the way she clung to him. Something that made him believe that this moment wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper, a truth that he had yet to piece together. Lennox's eyes flicked toward the girl, and the hiker's stomach twisted. The recognition in Lennox's gaze made the hiker's blood run cold. It wasn't just that Lennox had found them, it was that he knew exactly who the child was. And worse, he knew what she had seen. "Put her down," Lennox said, his tone casual, like he was offering a suggestion. But there was no mistaking the dangerous edge in his voice. "She's a long way from home, isn't she?" The hiker tightened his grip on the girl. His heart raced, the adrenaline flooding his system, but his mind was still moving through the fog, trying to make sense of everything. What was Lennox's game? What did he want with this girl? Why had he been following them through the storm? And why had he waited until now to show himself? The child's grip on the hiker's jacket tightened as Lennox took a step forward. The hiker could see her eyes wide with terror, but there was something else there too. Something that told him she knew exactly who Lennox was. And worse, she knew exactly why he was here. The storm thundered above them, the rain pouring down in torrents, but the hiker could hear the silence between them. Every breath he took felt heavy, as if the weight of the moment was pushing down on him. He had no weapon, no defense, no way out. But then Scrap growled, low and dangerous, the sound coming from deep within his chest. The dog stepped forward, positioning himself between the hiker and Lennox, his fur bristling. The hiker's heart skipped a beat. For all the fear that he felt, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. Scrap was here, with him. The dog wouldn't let anything happen to the child, and neither would he. "You've got a lot of nerve," the hiker said, his voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper against the storm. But he was standing taller now, the fear fading slightly as the realization set in. He wasn't alone in this. Scrap was with him, and the child. She wasn't just a casualty in all of this. She was a piece of the puzzle he was only beginning to understand. Lennox's smile faded, replaced with a glint of annoyance. "You think this is some kind of game?" he asked, his voice sharp now, cutting through the tension. "You're in over your head, friend. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The hiker's eyes narrowed. He didn't know what Lennox was talking about, but he wasn't about to let this man walk away with the child. Whatever secrets Lennox was hiding, they weren't going to be exposed today, not if he had anything to say about it. "I don't need to know everything," the hiker said, his voice gaining strength. "I know enough." Lennox raised an eyebrow, then his lips parted in a slow, predatory grin. "You really have no idea, do you?" He took another step forward, and the hiker's hand tightened around the child, pulling her closer. "Tell me," the hiker said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Why do you want her?" Lennox's eyes flicked back to the girl, and the hiker saw the recognition flare in his gaze again. There was something dark, something hidden in that look, a history between them that the hiker wasn't privy to. Yet. "Let's just say," Lennox drawled, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone, "she knows more than she's letting on." The words hit the hiker like a slap to the face. His mind reeled, trying to piece together the fragments of this twisted puzzle. What did the girl know? What had she seen that was so dangerous? And why had Lennox been following them? What was his true connection to the girl? Before he could gather his thoughts, the ground beneath him trembled, and a distant rumble of thunder echoed through the trees. The storm seemed to grow louder, more violent, but in the silence that followed, something shifted in the air. The girl's hands slowly moved, almost imperceptibly, as she shifted in the hiker's arms. She pressed a small, trembling hand to his chest, her fingertips brushing against the edge of his jacket. He could feel the tremor in her touch, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, a warning. The hiker's gaze snapped down to her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice soft, a question he didn't even realize he had until the words were out. The girl opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she looked up at him with a mixture of fear and something far deeper, regret. And then, in the darkness of that storm-ravaged night, a single piece of the puzzle fell into place. Lennox wasn't just after her, he was after what she knew. And that knowledge, that secret, had the power to bring everything crashing down. The moment cracked like lightning across the night sky. The hiker barely had time to react before Scrap lunged, teeth bared, body a streak of motion across the clearing. Lennox cursed, stumbled back, and raised the butt of his rifle. But he was too slow. Scrap collided with him full force, knocking the weapon from his hands and sending them both crashing to the muddy ground. The hiker didn't wait. He spun around, shielding the girl with his body, as he darted toward the tree line. She clung to him, her face buried in his chest. But he felt the twist in her body, the way she reached back, her fingers pointing desperately toward the cabin. "No," she rasped, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "Not the woods. They're in the woods." The words hit him like a slap, and his feet faltered mid-step. He turned. The cabin's door still swung open. The storm framed it like a stage set, lightning crackling overhead. Scrap was snarling, teeth flashing as he snapped toward Lennox, who was scrambling through the mud, reaching for something the hiker couldn't see. The hiker didn't have time to think. He bolted for the cabin. Inside, the air was thick, mildew and smoke, old sweat and something else, chemical, metallic. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, cradling the girl tighter as he crossed the threshold. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the dim, flickering light. A single oil lamp burned on a crooked table. The walls were lined with cracked cabinets, old books, tools, and, God, rows of children's shoes. Small, mismatched, silent. His breath caught. There were photographs on the far wall. Dozens of them. Grainy, black and white. Polaroids. Some in color, some torn. Children, all of them. Blank-eyed, afraid. Standing in front of bare concrete walls or bunk beds with scratchy blankets. He backed up a step, almost stumbled. The girl stirred in his arms, her voice no louder than a heartbeat. "This is where they bring us." United States. He looked down at her, then at the photographs, and it all started to fall into place. This cabin wasn't just a hunting lodge. It was a waypoint, a transfer station in the woods. And Lennox, he wasn't working alone. The sound of fighting outside broke through the horror. Scrap let out a sharp yelp, followed by a cry of pain. Lennox's, the hiker realized, a second before Scrap came barreling into the cabin, bleeding from a cut along his side but still moving, still ready to fight. Then, movement. A noise from behind the cabin wall. A thud. Another door. The hiker turned, scanned the room. There, tucked beside a cabinet, was a narrow door half covered in an old quilt. A cold draft hissed through the gap beneath it. Scrap barked, then snarled at the door. The hiker lowered the girl gently to the floor, kneeling beside her. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'll be right back." She didn't speak, just nodded. And then she reached into her soaked jacket and pulled out something he hadn't seen before. A small silver locket, dirt-streaked and rusted at the edges. She pressed it into his hand. "My sister's," she said. "She didn't make it." He stared at the locket. It was warm from her body. Inside was a faded picture of two girls, twins, smiling, innocent. The world hadn't touched them yet. He closed it, tucked it into his pocket like a promise. Scrap moved beside him, low and ready, as the hiker stepped toward the hidden door and eased it open. Stairs, wooden, narrow, leading down into darkness. He felt the cold first, not just the chill of underground, but something deeper, a breathless kind of silence. He descended slowly, Scrap close behind. The hallway at the bottom was cement. Bare bulbs flickered on exposed wires. On the left, metal doors one after the other, the kind you'd see in old hospitals or forgotten bunkers. Some were open, some were shut. Inside the open ones, small rooms, mattresses on the floor, crates, empty bowls, scratched walls. One door, locked, from the outside. He approached slowly, listened. Silence. Then, breathing. He turned the latch, pushed it open. A boy, maybe 9, filthy, thin, curled in a corner with wide, terrified eyes. When the hiker stepped inside, the boy flinched. Scrap whined softly, and the boy looked at the dog. His body relaxed, just a little. "I'm not gonna hurt you," the hiker said, his voice breaking. "You're safe now." More footsteps echoed upstairs. Voices. The hiker turned. Someone else had arrived. Scrap growled, moving ahead, body tense. He wasn't sure how many people were upstairs now, but it didn't matter. This place, this whole operation, was part of something much bigger than Lennox. And now they knew the hiker had found it. He looked back at the boy, then at Scrap. "We have to get them out. Now." The escape wasn't clean. Scrap took another hit, this time from a crowbar swung by a man in a dark poncho, his face hidden behind a cloth mask. The hiker tackled the man, slammed his head into the cabin wall, and they kept moving. The boy ran ahead, the girl too now, holding Scrap's leash like it was a lifeline. They didn't stop. Thunder cracked above them as they pushed through the trees. Mud sucked at their boots. Lights flashed behind. Flashlights or torches, more voices shouting. But the hiker knew these woods better than they did. He found the ravine, the old ranger trail he'd marked earlier in the week when he first started hiking this region. They slid down the embankment, crawled beneath fallen trees, ducked through underbrush until the lights were gone, until it was just them. Rain, breathing. He checked the kids, bruised but alive. Scrap collapsed beside them, bloodied and panting, but still alert. The hiker leaned back against the tree, every inch of him aching. He looked at the girl. What was that place? Her eyes, still far too old for her years, locked with his. It's one of many. The rain had slowed now. Dawn wasn't far, and the world, for the first time in a long while, was about to start asking some very hard questions. The hiker reached into his pocket and pulled out the locket, turned it in his hand, felt its weight. Scrap pressed against his leg, eyes never leaving the trees. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. But he'd found them, and they weren't alone anymore. The dawn came gray and reluctant, spilling cold light across the forest like a secret slowly revealed. Mist clung to the earth in tendrils, softening the jagged outlines of the trees and the scars left in the mud where they'd fled. The storm had passed, but in its wake was a silence that felt heavier than thunder. The hiker crouched by the riverbank, cupping water in his hands and pressing it gently to the boy's face. The child didn't flinch this time, just watched him with eyes far too guarded for someone so small. Beside them, the girl sat with her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tree line behind them, where the cabin had vanished in the distance. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe it would always be there, in her mind, in all of theirs. Scrap lay close by, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm. Blood matted the fur along his ribs, but his ears twitched at every sound, every rustle in the underbrush. He was resting, but not off duty. Never off duty. The hiker leaned back on his heels. His body ached like it had been through war, and in some ways it had. But it wasn't the bruises that weighed on him. It was the locket in his pocket. He pulled it out and turned it in his fingers again, watching how the morning light caught the faded photograph inside. 2 girls, 1 locket, and now, only 1. I think we need to talk to someone, he said quietly, glancing toward the children. Someone who can actually do something. The girl didn't look up. They won't believe us. Her voice was calm, not angry, just tired, like she'd said it before, like she'd lived it. The boy looked at her, then at the hiker. They tried before, he said so softly the wind almost stole the words. No one listened. The hiker swallowed hard. He had been one of those people once, the ones who didn't listen, the ones who walked past something that didn't look quite right and told themselves it was none of their business, that someone else would handle it, that it wasn't his responsibility. And now here he was, ankle deep in cold river water, clutching a bloodied dog and 2 broken children because fate, or guilt, had refused to let him stay blind. I know someone, he said finally. She's a ranger, ex-military. She won't let this slide. The girl's eyes flicked toward him, skeptical. He reached out slowly, not to touch her, but to show her something. His sleeve pulled back slightly as he dug into the inside of his jacket, and that's when she saw the scar. Long, pale, surgical. Her eyes widened. You were in it, she whispered. The system. He nodded once. Got out. Barely. Didn't take anyone with me. That's what eats at me now. It wasn't a confession. It was a tether. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle rush of water over stone and the occasional chirp of a waking bird. Then slowly, the girl nodded. Okay. They moved at sunrise. The ranger station was 3 miles out, a converted fire lookout on a ridge that overlooked the valley. He'd passed it during one of his early hikes and met the woman stationed there, Officer Elena Marquez, She had a K9 partner too, a big German shepherd named Coda. If there was anyone in this county who would believe them, really believe them, it was her. The hike was slow. The boy had a limp, and Scrap's injuries were worse than they'd first appeared. But they pushed forward, pausing often, staying low when they heard engines in the distance. Drones, maybe, or ATVs from whoever Lennox had working with him. This wasn't just about one cabin anymore. It was a network, a machine, and they'd tripped something far bigger than they knew. By the time they reached the trail that wound up to the Ranger's Ridge, the sky had cleared to a pale blue. From the overlook, they could see for miles, pines and fog and the faraway smoke of something burning. The cabin, maybe, or someone covering it up. Elena stepped out as they approached, Coda at her heel. The dog froze, ears forward, growling low. Then Scrap barked, a single sharp sound, and the tension broke. Coda relaxed. Elena's eyes narrowed. She took in the scene in a heartbeat. 2 children, a bloodied German shepherd, a man she vaguely remembered from a hiker's license ID, now looking like hell warmed over. She reached for her radio, then stopped. "What happened?" she asked, her voice even but alert. The hiker didn't answer right away. He simply stepped forward and handed her the locket. She opened it. Her face didn't change, but her posture did. Shoulders stiffened, jaw clenched. The girl stepped forward. "I was at Camp Lilac," she said quietly. "That's what they call it." Elena looked up sharply. "That camp closed 2 years ago." The girl just stared at her. "No," she said. "It moved." The air around them changed. Even the birds stopped singing. Marquez looked at the hiker. "Inside. Now." The kids huddled near the heater while Elena pulled up a secure line. The hiker gave her everything: names, coordinates, the tunnels beneath the cabin, the photographs. He showed her the video he'd taken on his phone before they fled. Shaky and dark, but enough to be damning. And then came the moment that felt like a shift in gravity. Marquez opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were reports, disappearances, ranger sightings, children seen and then vanishing, complaints filed and buried. The threads were already there. They just hadn't been connected. Until now. Elena leaned forward, her voice low. "If you're telling the truth, and I believe you are, we've just uncovered something that goes far beyond this mountain. These kids, they're not the only ones." The hiker looked at the girl. "She said that too." Marquez nodded once. "Then we bring it down, all of it." And just like that, they weren't fugitives anymore. They were witnesses. They were warriors. They were a beginning. Rain returned by nightfall, gentle this time, like the mountain was trying to wash itself clean of what had been unearthed. But there are stains that don't rinse away with water. Elena stood on the overlook outside the ranger station, eyes scanning the dark horizon. The radio at her hip crackled with half-formed sentences and clip confirmations. Task forces mobilizing, missing persons units reactivated, and old files being reopened by people who'd once sworn they didn't exist. She'd kicked a hornet's nest, and she had no intention of running. Inside, the kids were asleep for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The boy curled beneath a wool blanket, Scrap's head resting on his small shoulder, one ear twitching at every creak of the wood. The girl, though still restless, had stopped flinching in her dreams. Coda lay at her feet like a silent sentinel, his golden eyes flickering open every time the wind blew too hard against the walls. The hiker stood near the wood stove, staring into the orange glow, eyes hollow with the kind of tired that came from caring too much for too long. Elena didn't ask for his name again. She figured he'd offer it when he was ready. Right now, she knew enough. He'd walked into hell, pulled 2 ghosts from the fire, and come out swinging. She joined him by the stove, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug of black coffee. "I've seen some dark corners of the world," she said quietly. "War zones, border camps, places where no one's watching. But this? Kids being trafficked through federal land, hidden under the cover of fake permits and fake programs?" He didn't look at her, just asked, "How deep do you think it goes?" She sipped her coffee. Deep enough that no one was supposed to find it. Outside, thunder murmured faintly in the distance. He finally broke the silence. "I think Scrap was meant to find her. Like it wasn't an accident. Like something called him." Elena glanced toward the dog. His breathing was steady now. The blood had dried around his wound, and she'd done what she could with gauze and antiseptic, but there was a tremor in his leg that hadn't gone away. "He's not just a pet," she said. "You know that. He's one of them. Like Coda. Like mine was." The hiker turned. "Military. Rescue division. Coda was trained to find survivors in collapsed buildings. Earthquakes, explosions. But sometimes, they find things no one's looking for." He nodded, the pieces beginning to take shape in his mind. "You think this place, the cabin, the tunnels, was part of Camp Lilac?" "I think it was worse," Elena replied. "Lilac was the front. What happens when the front is shut down but the demand's still there? It goes underground, tighter, quieter, and more protected." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal tag, scuffed, rusted. He ran his thumb across the raised letters. Dog tags, not his. "Found them in the cabin's lower room," he said. "No name I recognize." Elena took the tags, turned them over. Her eyes sharpened. "Franklin Cords," she read. That's DHS, Department of Homeland." Her breath hitched and she stepped back. "That's not just a contractor. That's a handler. Someone with authority, someone who could pull kids from systems without raising flags." The air in the room turned colder, despite the fire. The hiker looked down at the kids. "They don't even know how close they came to disappearing completely." "And how many already have?" Elena whispered. He felt it again, that pressure in his chest. Not fear, not even anger. Purpose. A slow rumble of tires outside snapped them both to attention. Elena moved fast, pulling a sidearm from her belt as she edged to the window. The hiker ducked the lights and reached for his pack. A black SUV idled at the trailhead. No markings, no emergency lights. Then a man stepped out. Dark coat, broad shoulders, and an umbrella he didn't open, as if the rain didn't dare touch him. Elena narrowed her eyes. "Federal," she muttered, "but not local." The man didn't move toward the station. He stood still, waiting. Coda growled low. The hiker took a step forward. "We need to move the kids. Now!" Elena didn't argue. She knew that look. It wasn't a visit. It was a message. She grabbed her keys. "There's a shelter 2 miles down the old fire road. Unmarked. It's where we used to train for covert ops. No power, no communications. Perfect place to disappear for a while." He moved toward the sleeping kids, gently waking them with a whisper and a hand on their shoulder. They blinked up at him, confused but not frightened. "Not anymore." Scrap rose with effort. Coda moved to his side, steadying him with a nudge. "You get them there," Elena said. "I'll deal with Mr. Umbrella." He looked at her, uncertain. "You sure?" Her hand hovered near her weapon. "I've been waiting a long time to pick the right fight." He nodded once, then slipped out the back door with the kids and both dogs in tow. The forest swallowed them whole. The man in the black coat watched the ranger station for a long time. Then, without ever raising his voice or his hands, he returned to the SUV. Inside, someone else waited. "He took the kids." The man didn't answer. "Just close the door." "Then we'll have to burn the trail again," the voice said. "Too late," the man replied, eyes fixed on the woods beyond. "The dogs have already sniffed out the rot." And far beyond the reach of headlights, through trees dripping with rain and truth, the hiker led 2 children deeper into the forest. Not to run, but to survive, to expose, to fight. For the first time in his life, he wasn't walking alone. The fire road was nothing more than a forgotten scar through the forest, narrow, overgrown, hemmed in by ferns and fog. The hiker moved like a man born of shadow, his steps careful, fluid, every sound from the underbrush registered and filed. The kids followed in silence, their trust now woven into something deeper than words. Scrap limped beside them, head low but alert, his loyalty outweighing pain. And Coda, ever the silent sentinel, took the lead, carving a path through uncertainty. The air smelled of wet earth and pine resin. It was the kind of quiet that could either mean safety or something worse. After nearly an hour, they reached it. Tucked into the side of a ravine, behind a curtain of moss-covered stone and bramble, the shelter appeared. A rusted hatch, concrete steps angling downward into darkness. No lights, no sound, just the feeling that this place hadn't been touched in years. The hiker hesitated. Then, placing his hand against the cold metal, he pushed it open. The hinges groaned like an old man waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air was stale but dry. A single room, reinforced steel walls, a cot, an old field stove, cabinets sealed tight, emergency rations, maps with faded ink pinned to the walls, routes and markings left by soldiers who had long since disappeared into other wars. He lit a lantern. The glow was soft, golden, the kind of light that invited stillness. The girl stepped inside and didn't speak, just walked to the back wall and sat, arms wrapped around her knees. The boy moved to Scrap's side, pulling the dog's head into his lap and stroking the scarred fur behind his ears. He didn't cry, but his lip quivered in the flickering light. The hiker unrolled a mat and knelt beside the boy. "You okay?" The kid didn't answer at first. Then he looked up, eyes reflecting something old and haunted. "I remember faces now," he said. "I didn't before. But in the tunnel, I saw them. The men who used to come at night." The hiker's stomach clenched. "You don't have to talk about that." "I know," the boy said quietly, "but I think maybe if I do, they'll go away." The hiker nodded and they sat in silence together, surrounded by echoes. Above them, thunder grumbled. The rain began again, heavier now, cleansing nothing. Back at the ranger station, Elena watched as the SUV drove away. Not in a hurry, not in fear, like it had done this before, like it would again. She stood by the window, one hand on her radio. "Dispatch, this is Marquez. I need full access to the DHS database. Name, Franklin Cord. Badge ID C7931-X7. And I need the files marked Lilac Project, classified or not." A beat of silence, then a static-filled response. "Request denied. File sealed by federal order." She smiled coldly. "Then unseal it." The radio crackled. "Negative. You're stepping outside your authority." Elena switched off the radio. "This is the part," she murmured, "where the ones with badges start running scared." She pulled out her phone and tapped a name. A voice answered on the third ring. "Still have that contact in internal affairs?" There was a pause. "Depends who's asking." "Elena Marquez. And I just found the graveyard behind Camp Lilac." A slow, exhaled breath on the other end. "I'm listening." And just like that, the first domino fell. By the time night had swallowed the forest whole, news had started moving quietly. Off the record. Trusted channels only. Files long buried began surfacing in encrypted threads. A web of facilities disguised as therapy retreats, behavior reform schools, and wilderness camps. Camp Lilac was only one of them. The pattern was clear. Vulnerable children taken from overwhelmed foster systems, juveniles misdiagnosed with behavioral disorders, kids labeled unadoptable, shuffled into places where oversight was minimal. Funding flowed through fake nonprofits. Protection was built into silence, but something had cracked. Inside the bunker, the girl finally spoke. "Do you think they'll come for us?" The hiker looked at her. "Yes." She didn't flinch. "But I think we'll be ready," he added. She stared at the lantern. "They told me I'd never leave, that even if I ran, no one would believe me." "I believe you." Her eyes lifted, and something shifted in them, a crack in the armor. "They called me number 7. The hiker blinked. "7?" he asked softly. She nodded. "That's what the man said, that I was the 7th one who'd gotten out, but none of the others made it far. He said they all came back." His blood turned to ice. "They're tracking you." "I think so." He stood quickly, scanning the shelter. The air was still thick with quiet, but now it felt wrong. Not just isolated, watched. Scrap growled low. Coda was already moving toward the hatch. The hiker grabbed his bag, heart racing. "We have to move again, now." "Where?" the girl asked, rising. "We take this public. No more hiding." "But they've already started covering tracks. Once they know you're still breathing, they'll burn everything. We can't wait. We show the world what they tried to erase." She hesitated. "And if no one listens again?" The hiker reached into his jacket. From an inner pocket, he pulled out something small and black. A GoPro, smeared, cracked, but blinking red. "I got the whole thing. The tunnels, the rooms, their voices." He turned to her, his voice low but filled with something fierce. "Now we let them watch." Behind them, thunder cracked like the sky itself had snapped open. A flash of lightning illuminated the trees above the hatch, just long enough to show two figures moving through the underbrush. The hiker didn't wait. He threw open the hatch and the group disappeared into the night, the forest swallowing them once more. But this time, they weren't running to hide. They were running to reveal, and they weren't alone. Somewhere far from the mountain, a screen flickered to life. An anonymous upload, a video, a voice. "I was number 7, and I remember everything." The screen went black, and the internet lit up like wildfire. Smoke rose over the treetops by dawn, not from fire, from the slow burn of secrets unraveling, on screens, in inboxes, in courtrooms that had once looked the other way. The video had gone viral in under 4 hours, unlisted at first, then leaked, then reshared by journalists, whistleblowers, watchdog groups who'd been screaming into the void for years, finally handed proof no one could ignore. The footage was raw, grainy, shaky, the lens catching too much darkness, but it was enough. Enough to see the tunnel, enough to hear the girl's voice, small but unwavering, describing what happened in each room. Enough to catch fragments of a man's voice barking orders. Recognizable if you knew what you were listening for. Franklin Cord, a name that had once been whispered in briefing rooms like a myth, now plastered across headlines as a monster in a suit. And at the center of it all, an unnamed hiker with a battered GoPro, a wounded dog, and 2 children whose nightmares had finally been believed. Elena watched it unfold from her truck, parked just off an old service road. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the weight of it. After all the reports ignored, all the chain of command silence, the tide had finally broken. She flicked the radio on, static, then a voice. "Federal investigation underway. DHS official placed on leave. Camp Lilac now officially linked to a series of disappearances stretching back more than a decade." She exhaled. One win, for now. But she knew the system, knew how quickly a wildfire of truth could be buried under controlled burns of spin and delay. The kids weren't safe yet. None of them were. She started the engine. Miles away, the hiker crouched by a cold stream, washing blood from Scrap's fur. The old shepherd had collapsed halfway through the night, not from the leg wound, but sheer exhaustion. Every breath was harder now, every movement a battle. But Scrap's eyes were sharp, focused, like he was still watching something the rest of them couldn't see. The boy sat beside him, gently running his fingers through the dog's thick fur. "Is he gonna die?" The hiker looked up, said nothing for a long time. Scrap had been limping since the day they found the girl. He'd barely eaten, barely slept, and yet he'd refused to stop, like he had one final mission etched into his soul. The girl came over and knelt beside the dog. "He found me," she whispered. "I was supposed to die there, but he didn't let that happen." Her hand rested on Scrap's chest. "He's the only one who looked at me and didn't see something broken." Tears slid down her cheeks. The hiker turned away, blinking hard. Scrap stirred, lifted his head, pressed his nose gently into the girl's palm. Then he exhaled and stilled. The forest went quiet. The boy choked on a sob, burying his face into Scrap's neck. The girl didn't move, just closed her eyes and whispered something no one else could hear. The hiker crouched beside them, his hand on the boy's back. There were no words for this kind of loss, only gratitude, only grief. They buried him beneath an old cedar, high above the riverbend. Wrapped in a tarp, dog tags placed gently beside him, the soil filled in by shaking hands and silent prayers. The girl placed a pine cone on the fresh mound of earth. That way, he always knows where home is. That night, they lit a small fire under the stars. No tents, no walls, just flame and sky and silence. The hiker stared into the glow, the weight of Scrap's loss pressing into him like a stone. The pain of it opened something in him he'd kept buried for too long. "I had a partner once," he said quietly. The girl looked over. "A dog?" He nodded. "Her name was Nova. She saved my life in Kandahar. Twice. First time from an IED. Second time from myself." The words came slowly, each one heavier than the last. "I was ready to eat my gun when I got home. But she'd look at me like I still mattered, like I was still worth something." He wiped a hand across his face. "She got cancer 2 years after we retired. I held her the whole way through." Silence settled again. Deeper this time. The girl shifted closer. "Scrap had scars. You could see them, but he never let them stop him." The boy added, "Neither do you." The hiker smiled faintly, the firelight catching in his eyes. From the shadows beyond the fire, Coda lifted his head, ears twitching, something moving in the trees. Then, a sound. Boots. Fast. Urgent. Elena emerged from the dark, breathless, her uniform streaked with mud, her badge half torn from the Velcro. "They're coming," she said. "But not just the feds. Mercs. Cleanup crew. Court activated them before the story broke. They're already 2 hours behind us." The hiker stood. "You bring transport?" She nodded. "But we have to go now." He grabbed his bag. "Where?" "I've got a safe house, cold storage facility converted during COVID. Off-grid, reinforced. I can hold them off if—" "No," he cut her off. "We hold them off together." She met his gaze. "You sure you're up for another fight?" He looked at the kids, at the fire, at Scrap's grave silhouetted in the moonlight. "I wasn't meant to survive what I did, but I did." He pointed at the girl. "So she could." He looked back at Elena. "I'm not walking away until this ends." Elena smiled. "Good," she said, "because I brought you something." She reached into her pack and pulled out a sealed envelope. Military grade. Classified markings. He took it and opened it carefully. Inside, photos, blueprints, communications logs, a map marked with a red X. The final piece of the puzzle. He looked up, and for the first time since this started, he knew exactly where to go. To end it. Not just for the kids still lost in the system, but for the ghosts still trapped in the tunnels. For the ones no one had come for. Until now. The night was thick with tension as the safe house came into view. An old warehouse crouched low against the earth, its roof partially collapsed, half swallowed by bramble and shadow. If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't even glance twice. That was the point, hidden in plain sight. Steel reinforced beneath rotting wood. The convoy rolled in silent, headlights cut. Elena led in her battered SUV, the hiker behind her on a dirt bike, with the kids wrapped tightly around his waist. Coda ran ahead, silent as a ghost, his black shape barely discernible in the darkness. Inside it was cold. Not metaphorically, literally. The walls had once stored vaccine shipments during the pandemic. Now they stored something heavier. Records, footage, maps, hard drives. Each one a nail in the coffin of a system that had hidden monsters in clean suits and polished shoes. The hiker set the kids on the ground gently. The girl moved first, her eyes flicking to every shadow. Not out of fear, instinct. She was watching for patterns now, listening for silence that was too silent. The boy trailed behind, holding Scrap's dog tags in his small fist. He hadn't let go of them once since the burial. Coda stood sentry by the entrance, ears back, tail low. He could sense it. All of them could. They were close. Elena was already inside the control room, rerouting security feeds and killing all cellular access. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before they find this place. If they even suspect we're here, they'll hit hard," the hiker finished. "Not to arrest, to erase." She nodded grimly. "Cord's off-grid. No signal since this morning. My bet? He's either already here or sending someone who won't hesitate." The hiker stepped forward and dropped the envelope she'd given him earlier on the table. "Spread it open. This is the last one. The origin site." He pointed to the red X on the map. It wasn't just Camp Lilac. That was a branch. The roots deeper, older. A site labeled Project Vive IGIL. Elena's brow furrowed. That wasn't in the initial files. It was off books, hidden inside Black Ops funding through Homeland. Site buried during a flood in 2009. But they rebuilt, underground. No permits, no paper trail, just kids and silence. He slid a photo across the table. A corridor nearly identical to Lilac's, but older, rusted, cracked tiles and flood stains along the wall. The timestamp was erased, but the fear in the child's eyes was timeless. "That's where we go next," he said, "to finish it." Elena looked at him. "You know you might not make it out." He met her gaze. "I've been dying for years," he said. "Might as well do it for something that matters." The room fell into silence. Then a soft voice behind him. "I'm going too." The girl stood at the door, chin lifted, eyes firm. "You said we fight this together." The hiker walked over. "You've already done more than anyone ever should." She held his gaze. "So did Scrap. He gave everything for me. I'm not hiding. Not anymore." He hesitated, then nodded. At dawn, they left the safe house. Not through roads, but through the woods. A secret route traced in red ink and blood memories. Coda led the way again, pacing every step like it might be his last. The hiker carried the files. The girl carried her voice, now weaponized with truth. The boy followed silently, Scrap's tags clinking softly with each step, like the echo of a ghost who still walked beside them. The entrance to Project Vigil was buried beneath a reservoir, concealed by false fencing and overgrown weeds. A hatch disguised as an irrigation shaft. They opened it and descended. The stairs were rusted. The air smelled like old ammonia and rot. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Then, hallways. Lights flickered dimly, motion triggered. A low hum thrummed through the concrete. The place was still alive. Footsteps echoed. Voices. Elena raised her weapon. The hiker lifted a flare, illuminating the path ahead. And that's when they saw him. Franklin Cord, not in a suit. In a uniform, black tactical gear, helmet under one arm. No tie, no mask. Just a man who had orchestrated hell with perfect composure. He stood flanked by two mercs, unmarked, silent, their rifles already half raised, but he smiled. "I was wondering when you'd show," Cord said. "You always had a thing for lost causes." The hiker stepped forward, placing the flare down on the floor. Its light pulsed, casting their shadows long and wild across the walls. "You're done, Cord," Cord chuckled. "The internet is a toy. You think you can win this with likes and comments?" "No," the hiker replied, "with names, faces, victims who survived." He motioned behind him. The girl stepped forward. Cord's smile faded. "You should have died in that tunnel," he hissed. The girl didn't blink. "You told me I didn't matter." She pulled a small drive from her pocket and held it up. "But I recorded everything." Behind her, Elena lowered her weapon and pulled out a satellite beacon, now blinking green. "Live transmission," she said. "You're already streaming." Cord froze. The mercs faltered, and then Coda lunged. The hiker moved fast. One gunshot rang out, clipped the wall. Elena tackled one guard. The girl ducked and rolled, sliding the drive into the port on a control terminal. Sparks flew. The screens blinked, and then filled with faces. Children, files, names. A whole database of stolen childhoods laid bare in front of the world. Cord roared and rushed forward, but the hiker met him halfway. They collided hard. Fists, elbows, dirt and rage. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't clean. It was justice. The hiker finally pinned Cord against the wall, forearm at his throat. "You buried them. Everyone." Cord choked, struggling. "They were liabilities. No one wanted them. They were children." He slammed Cord into the wall and let him fall. Sirens rose outside, federal. Too late to clean up, but just in time to see the truth. By noon, Cord was in custody. By nightfall, the names of every victim across every facility were being read on national broadcasts. And the girl? She stood in front of a microphone, shoulder to shoulder with the hiker and Elena. "I was number 7, she said, "but I'm not a number anymore. I'm not a victim. I'm not afraid." And behind her, the boy clutched Scrap's tags in both hands. He lifted them high, and 1,000 more lifted theirs too. Dog tags, names, photographs. proof that every silent scream had been heard, that every forgotten child had not been lost in vain. And as the wind moved through the trees above the field where they gathered, single pine cone sat atop a small stone, far away, marking the place where a broken dog became a hero, where loyalty lit the fuse, where love ended a war and began something better. Not revenge, not justice, but healing. At last. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more powerful emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. There's so much more to come.